Maria had always been an organized woman. At 72, her routine was peaceful. She watered her plants each morning, kept her home in quiet order, and wrote her daily tasks in a small notebook she carried everywhere. But over the past few weeks, something had begun to trouble her more than she wanted to admit. It started with a simple lapse, the kind anyone could have. She couldn't remember the name of the neighbor who joined her for Sunday walks. A name she had repeated for decades suddenly felt locked behind a closed door. She later told me she felt a tightness in her chest. "Doctor," it was like the word was right there, but unreachable, she said. That sentence stayed with me, because many people over 60 describe moments like these, but rarely understand what they truly mean. These lapses are not signs of fading intelligence, nor proof that the mind is disappearing. They're simply the brain asking to be activated again, in the right way. I am Dr. Otávio, a specialist in cognitive health and aging, and I have heard countless stories like Maria's over the years. The silent fear of losing one's clarity is one of the most profound emotional burdens of aging. But what many people know is that this fear can be transformed, that the mind can respond quickly when it receives the right stimulus. When Maria sat across from me that day, she wasn't searching for miracles. She simply wanted her mornings to feel lighter again. She wanted clarity, presence, and the simple joy of remembering without fear. After listening to her calmly, I said something that surprised her. "Maria, let's begin with just a few minutes a day, nothing complicated, just a gentle wake-up for your brain." She blinked, slightly confused. "Just a few minutes?" "Yes," I replied. And so began the journey that would completely reshape the next 21 days and reveal something incredible about the aging brain. The morning after our consultation, Maria woke up earlier than usual. She admitted later that she felt a mix of curiosity and nervousness, as if she were about to attempt something simple, yet meaningful. This feeling is common. When memory is involved, every step carries emotional weight, because we're touching the core of who we are. The exercise I gave her required no physical strength, no speed, and no special skill. It was a short ritual, 5 minutes designed to activate 3 essential systems in the brain: attention, short-term memory, and intention. That's all. Still, these 3 steps can completely change how the brain wakes up, especially after I instructed her to begin by sitting on the edge of the bed, breathing calmly, and sensing her body waking up. This first step awakens the system of attention. When your brain notices that you're present, it begins shifting out of the slow, foggy state that many older adults confuse with memory weakness. In reality, it's just lack of activation. Next, I asked her to recall 2 or 3 simple details from the previous day, something she saw, something she heard, something she did, nothing extraordinary, just details from everyday life. This small act activates the hippocampus, the brain region responsible for organizing and retrieving memories. And the more the hippocampus works, the stronger it becomes. Finally, I instructed her to visualize a small task she would do later: watering plants, calling someone, organizing something simple. This step activates the prefrontal cortex, preparing the brain for clarity, focus, and smoother decision-making throughout the day. Maria completed all of this in just over 4 minutes. And yet, she described something that many of my patients also feel in the early days. "Doctor, it felt like a little window opened in my head. It was subtle, but real." Her brain was responding, and that was only the beginning. During the first 7 days, Maria followed the training with admirable consistency, not out of obligation, but because something intriguing was happening. She described her mornings as lighter, as if the mental fog she had lived with were finally thinning. This is one of the earliest signs that the brain is waking up properly. When she called me at the end of the first week, I could sense the shift just by her voice. There was still caution. People over 60 often fear disappointment, but there was also a subtle brightness, a quiet hopefulness, grounded in real change. I explained to her that the brain loves repetition. Each morning she completed the ritual, even if it felt simple. She strengthened 3 systems: attention, short-term memory, executive clarity. When these systems begin working together again, cognitive flow improves. That's why she was misplacing fewer items. That's why words were returning more easily. That's why conversations felt clearer. She told me something that touched me deeply. "Doctor, I kept up with my children's conversations this week. I didn't feel lost." This is one of the most meaningful signs of genuine cognitive improvement. Conversation requires memory, presence, and focus. When the mind is sluggish, it becomes exhausting. When the mind awakens, it becomes natural again. Scientifically, everything she was experiencing made sense. The hippocampus was regaining rhythm, the prefrontal cortex was stabilizing attention, synapses, the bridges between neurons, were becoming more efficient. The first week did not bring a dramatic transformation, but it brought something far more important: real, visible hope. And that is always the turning point in this journey. At the 2-week mark, something remarkable happened. Maria described this phase as an internal settling, as if her brain were finding a smoother, clearer rhythm. This is extremely common when older adults begin responding deeply to consistent cognitive activation. At our consultation, she walked in with a kind of quiet confidence. She sat down, smiled softly, and said, Doctor, it feels like my mind arrives before my body. This sentence reveals something profound. It shows that her prefrontal cortex, the center of clarity, reasoning, and organization, was waking up earlier and more efficiently. When that happens, everything else improves. She said words were coming more easily. Dates were less confusing. Daily tasks flowed naturally instead of feeling chaotic or overwhelming. This didn't happen overnight. It was the accumulation of small signals repeated day after day, exactly what the aging brain responds to best. I explained the 3 changes happening beneath the surface. The hippocampus gains timing, memory retrieval becomes smoother, the prefrontal cortex stabilizes, focus becomes less scattered, synapses strengthen, the pathways between neurons begin operating more freely. She also mentioned something rarely brought up, but incredibly important. Doctor, I'm sleeping better. A brain that wakes well tends to rest well. Clarity and restfulness are partners, not opposites. By day 14, Maria had not simply improved her memory. She had changed the rhythm of her thinking. She had restored cognitive balance, but the greatest transformation was yet to come, and it would happen on day 21. When Maria reached day 21, I knew before she spoke that something extraordinary had occurred. Her posture, her expression, even the way she held her notebook told a story. She sat down gently, looked at me with a steady gaze, and said, "Doctor, I feel like myself again." These words hold enormous weight. They're not just about memory, they're about identity, dignity, and presence. They speak to the deep emotional relief of realizing that one's mind is not slipping away. She described her changes in detail. Names came more naturally. Conversations felt fluid. She remembered recent events with clarity, and the heavy sensation in her head, that slow, foggy pressure, had all but disappeared. Why does this happen? Because by day 21, the brain forms a stable pattern. The pathways that were once slow become organized, synapses fire more efficiently. The hippocampus understands the rhythm of retrieval. The prefrontal cortex awakens earlier and stays active longer. This is the neurobiological foundation of habit formation, not perfection, not miracles, but adaptation. And the aging brain is exceptionally good at adapting when given consistent, gentle stimulation. Maria breathed deeply and said, "I never thought this kind of change was possible at my age." I told her what I've told countless patients. Your brain wasn't weak. It was waiting to be activated. Her transformation didn't come from force, intensity, or long routines. It came from constancy, calmness, and intention. On day 21, she didn't gain a new memory. She regained access to the memory she already had. And that is the greatest gift the mind can offer someone at 70, 80, or beyond. After the evaluation, I realized it was time to explain something that most people never hear, a truth that changes the way older adults view themselves. What happened to Maria was not luck. It was not an exception. It was the natural result of how the brain works later in life. The problem isn't age. The problem is the story society tells about age. For decades, people heard phrases like, "the brain slows down and stops working," or "forgetfulness is normal after 60." These ideas became part of culture, repeated so often that they began to sound like facts. But they are outdated and incomplete. The brain does not stop learning. It does not stop forming connections. It does not stop strengthening pathways. Not at 60, not at 70, not at 80. Neuroplasticity, the ability to reorganize and adapt, does not disappear. It simply becomes more dependent on the right kind of stimulation. What Maria did in those 21 days was not fix her memory. She reactivated her brain. When someone feels slow, forgetful, or mentally heavy, it is often due to underactivation, not degeneration. The brain goes into energy-saving mode when it isn't stimulated intentionally. The result? Slower recall, weaker focus, morning confusion, but these aren't signs of decline, they're signs of lack of activation. Maria listened quietly and then asked, "Doctor, so I wasn't losing my memory? I just wasn't waking my brain up." Exactly. Understanding this removes a tremendous emotional burden from anyone aging. It restores possibility. It replaces fear with direction. And it reminds us that forgetfulness is not destiny, it's feedback. Maria didn't reverse time. She didn't change her age. She changed her activation. And that reveals a profound truth. The mind doesn't fade the way people think. It rests, and it can be awakened. After hearing Maria's story, many people ask me, "Doctor, can I do this too?" And my answer is always the same. Absolutely yes. What transformed Maria wasn't luck, discipline, or complex programs. It was a simple, gentle structure repeated with consistency, something entirely within reach for anyone over 60. If you want to begin your own 21-day activation, the path is realistic and accessible. The key is not intensity, it is consistency. First, choose a fixed time, preferably in the morning. The brain loves predictability. When you train at the same time each day, your mind begins preparing for that moment, an internal wake-up signal. Then follow the 3 steps. Attention, awakening. Sit calmly, breathe, sense your body. Presence is the foundation of clarity. Short-term memory recall. Remember 2 or 3 simple details from yesterday. Let the memories come naturally, no pressure. The hippocampus responds best to softness. Intentional visualization. Picture yourself performing a simple task you'll do today. This activates the prefrontal cortex and organizes your day. The entire process takes about 5 minutes. These minutes realign your brain over 21 days, stabilizing cognitive flow, improving clarity, and reducing morning fog. If you want to deepen the training later, you can slowly expand the ritual with additional details or micro-challenges. But this comes after. What matters most is starting and keeping the process gentle. This is how a 21-day journey begins, with intention, calmness, and repetition. And the results can be surprisingly profound. When we reached the end of Maria's 21-day journey, she walked into my office with a calmness I hadn't seen before. Her posture was steadier, her eyes clearer. The way she moved carried a sense of self-assurance, the kind that returns when the mind finally feels alive again. She sat down slowly, looked at me and said, "Doctor, I thought I was losing myself, but now I realize I was only losing hope." Few sentences capture the emotional reality of cognitive decline as clearly as this. Memory isn't just function, it's identity, belonging, autonomy. When clarity fades, life feels smaller. When clarity returns, life expands again. Over these 21 days, Maria didn't just sharpen her memory, she regained something far deeper, the confidence that her mind is still hers. At 72, she discovered that her brain wasn't failing her, it was waiting for activation. And once stimulated correctly, it responded with strength, rhythm, and resilience. I explained to her that her experience is not rare. Thousands of people live in fear, believing forgetfulness means loss, when in truth it often means understipulation. They are not declining, they are dormant. And so I told her something I repeat to every patient who goes through this journey. You didn't go back in time. You simply came back to yourself. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. The deep relief of realizing that her mind is still capable, still adaptable, still alive. If you've stayed with this story until now, understand this. Nothing we've discussed is exclusive to Maria. Your brain hasn't lost its potential. It hasn't lost its strength. It hasn't lost its ability to reorganize itself. It simply needs the right invitation. And perhaps, like Maria, you are closer than you think to rediscovering your clarity, your confidence, and your presence. In the next video, I'll show you how to deepen these results even further, so that the next 21 days are not just a cycle, but the start of a new phase of cognitive vitality. Your mind can still flourish. This journey is only beginning.